is finally time to announce my finalist for SPFBOX, which if you don't know, it is the 10th season of the self-published fantasy blog-off that's hosted by Mark Lawrence. Now, I'm one of the 10 judges this year, which means I had 30 books to go through, and today I'm sharing with you that one book that I'm going to push through to the finals. Now, let me start off by saying this was not exactly easy to decide. I mean, there was quite a few hidden gems I found. I would say there's around 4 books that if it was up to me, I would like to see all 4 of them be pushed through to the finals, but I had to choose just one. So because of that, I am going to be sharing some of the runners up, some of the semi-finalists before I get to that number 1 spot. And I do want to say that I didn't get enough time over these last few months because I was working on that massive Words of Radiance summary video that just went up. So I am still going to be making some SPFBO reviews over the next few months here because I want to give a spotlight to some of these indie authors.
Let's read SPFBO, all but one book start to go.
Now, it is time to share 4 of these semi-finalists that, in my opinion, are hidden gems. I think you should read all 4 of these. Starting off with Stone and Sky by Z.S. Diamante. This is one of my favorite books I read for SPFBO, and I actually enjoyed it so much I already started on the second one. I'm enjoying that one, I think, even more than the first. So it's a fantastic series. I highly recommend getting into it, especially if you enjoy old school fantasy. This is basically a love letter to like old school Tolkien-esque fantasy. It has very lovable characters. It's very easy to get into. And I mean, we got griffin riders, we got orcs, magical islands, legendary weapons, mystical kingdoms and mysterious elves, and of course dragons, and so much more. What's not to love? This is like cozy fantasy at its finest. And when I say cozy fantasy, I don't mean there's low stakes. There's definitely some high stakes here, and it's a really just fun read. I highly recommend checking out Stone and Sky. And I'm definitely going to be making a full like series review once I read all the books, which is probably going to be pretty soon because I've just been flying through these books. Also, it has an amazing like top tier audiobook. Definitely recommend checking it out if you're into audiobooks. Next is Dragon Thief by Blake and Raven Penn. This is another one that was so close to becoming the finalist. It was so much fun. This is a YA adventure that is kind of like a heist novel, and it has this really interesting Brandon Sanderson-like magic system. There's actually like several magic systems at play here that I found so interesting to read. The characters here are a major highlight. I really enjoyed the humor and like the witty voice of Asher. I thought he was such a fun character to follow. And of course, this book has dragon riders. I love dragon riders, and I feel like this is dragon riders at its best. I don't know how to describe how fun this book is. I feel like the authors had so much fun with all the world building and everything. There's magical geckos that people use to communicate with each other. I don't know what else to say, but it is such like a fun, fast-paced heist novel. It has a little bit of romance in there, some great action scenes, and great uses of the magic system as well. I loved the bond between the humans and the dragons, and the secondary characters are fantastic as well. It's definitely more lighthearted of a story. It's not necessarily that like serious in tone, but it does still hit those emotional moments as well. I'm really excited to read the sequels, and I highly recommend checking out Dragon Thief. And then we have The Grand Game by Tom Elliott. This is one that really surprised me. This is a lit RPG book, and I feel like it had a pretty familiar beginning for a lit RPG, except the twist is that the protagonist is brought into the game, and there's like this being known as the Master, this powerful being that is actually evil. And like he says that the protagonist and all the other players, they were evil in their past life, but they don't remember. They have no memories anymore. And basically they have to bond to this familiar, this skeletal bat that follows him around and gives him advice on the game and whatnot. So that was a pretty interesting twist that we're kind of working for like the evil side, but not really, because the protagonist refuses. Like, the protagonist knows he has a moral code, and he's trying to do what he thinks is best. So I feel like that's something that kind of makes the grand game stand out. But then again, like 40% through the book, I would say, it really surprised me because it started to grow into its own. And there's so many unique things going on with the world building and with the scenarios that the characters fall into. I would say the prose itself was kind of simple. I wanted a bit more depth from the character, but it was very easy to get into, and I didn't want to put this book down, especially just with all the different scenarios he falls into, then learning about the game and the different classes there are and how they can actually mold. If stat points and attributes from one class fit with another class, they can kind of mold together. I found that so interesting. This is another one where after reading, I went and picked up all the sequels in the series because I know I want to read the whole series now. I'm invested enough that I want to read the entire thing. And if you're at all into RPGs or MMOs or Dungeons and Dragons, then I highly recommend checking out The Grand Game. And finally, the last semi-finalist I want to mention is Molten Flux by Jonathan Wise. This one, the author describes as desert punk, and yeah, I 100% would describe it as that. And I love that name for a subgenre. I really want to read more desert punk, so let me know if you have any recommendations. Basically, this is what happens if you mix Mad Max and Howl's Moving Castle, then you spice it up with a little bit of a Brandon Sanderson magic system in there as the seasoning. This is what you get, Molten Flux, and it's as awesome as that sounds. In this book, the protagonist, Ryza, is conscripted as a new soldier aboard the moving fortress called Revence, and this claustrophobic labyrinth of a beast is basically a setting in itself. And Ryza can control metal, he's what is known as a cretatic, and he can also create these arcanites, these tiny little robots, and there's also a magic system that involves painting ruins on your skin with water. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and there's also this stuff called Molten Flux, which when injected into a fresh enough corpse, it turns it into this zombie-like being called an Automind. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in this book. Really, this story had me hooked from the beginning. I just loved the premise of it, but then I felt really invested in the story as well. I mean, there's some really great deep character moments here and there, some great action scenes as well, and being a massive fan of desert settings, I really loved exploring the Droughtlands, and I really want to learn more, so I'm excited to continue reading this series, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who's at all interested in just the concept I explained to you, because it's a really awesome book, and I'd recommend checking it out. Now I know what you're thinking, all these books sound amazing, and yes they are, you should give all of them a read, but if these books are so awesome, which book did I pick for my finalist? Again, this was a very hard decision to make, but there was one book that stood out to me because of just how much quality it has. Like, this author is so talented. I'm really excited to read more by this author. Now, without further ado, my finalist for SPFBOX is, drumroll please, By Blood, by Salt, by J.L. Odom. This is book one in a Middle East-inspired military epic fantasy series called Land of Exile. Now, J.L. Odom was in the Marine Corps as a linguist for 5 years, and she says that her experiences were very influential in writing this book. And yeah, I can tell. I mean, not only is her description of just language, which I'll get into, just very masterfully well done, the book has this strong sense of like military camaraderie between the characters and the relationships, and it has this desert setting that has such a strong sense of culture and history. And it's safe to say I was very impressed with this book. So what's it about? Azetla has served the Marawan army for 13 years. There are 7 left to pay. A pariah and a debt soldier, he is a commander with no rank, a soldier without citizenship, and wears a sword that is unlawful for him to either own or use. He has learned to hold his tongue or risk losing everything. When Azetla's battalion is sent into the desert to catch a Sar Devil, one of the famously brutal inhabitants of the region, His tenuous position is threatened. He discovers that there is far more to this mission than catching a fiend. For the Emperor of Morrow, it is a way to prove that he fears nothing, not even devils. For the Emperor's brother, it is a stepping stone to rebellion. For a Zetla, it could be deadly either way, as he is cornered into choosing a side in the coming coup. But the devil that a Zetla finds in the desert is not what anyone expects or wants. As the conspiracy against the Emperor becomes entangled with the simmering ambitions of the desert tribes, a Zetla must decide if he's willing to strike a bargain with the devil in order to survive. Naturally, she is not to be trusted, but then again, neither is he. From the synopsis alone, I was very interested to begin with, but I didn't fully realize how much I was going to enjoy this book. The author has such a beautiful writing style. It appealed to me right away. Right when I opened up the book, from the very beginning, she just draws you in to this richly detailed world. It feels almost poetic in a way. And I can see how for some readers, the beginning might feel a little slow at times because you're being introduced to these various cultures. And it's a little bit of a learning curve just right from the beginning, but I didn't really have an issue with it. I felt like it just was building the foundations for this very vivid backdrop before we set off with the characters on their journey. And I really enjoyed the beginning, learning about these different cultures and this brutal festival that they're celebrating. So stick with it, because the author just paints such a clear picture of this world. You can't help but be drawn in. All of the in-world terms that are used for different languages, the superstitions and beliefs and the political systems, it all just works together so well to build this vivid world. It manages to not feel like an info dump at all. It just feels like it's setting down the foundations for a story that's as much about the world as it is about the characters. And this is very much a character-driven fantasy, and thankfully, the characters really shine here. I would say the characters are my favorite part of this book. A Zetla just feels so real. I mean, he's an outcast, and by many, they just consider him to be a jackal and worthless, so he doesn't really fit in with society. But over the course of the book, he slowly comes into his own. Captain Hodge of the Black Wren Battalion, which is a Zetla's battalion, is another really interesting character, and I loved how Odom showed the good and the bad when it comes to the life of these soldiers. We get the close bonds and the camaraderie, then we also get the gritty realism and the struggles they have to go through. There's a lot of long-harbored resentment between the different races here, so characters have to learn to bridge the gap in communication. Now we also get the point of view of James, who is the Emperor's brother, and I wasn't expecting to sympathize and relate to this character, or at least understand him, as much as I did. His older brother, the Emperor, is expanding his kingdom through violence and lies, and James just wants like an idle, simple life, but somehow he finds himself manipulated into becoming the face of a rebellion. James wants to join the expedition to find and bring back one of the legendary Sar Devils, believing it could be what he needs to drive his brother off the throne, while the Emperor believes it's a safe way to eliminate a brother he doesn't trust. And so he sends James to join the Black Wren Battalion on this journey. And the Sar Devils, whether human or Jinn, no one really knows, and I'm not going to spoil anything here, but there is very little actual magic that's displayed in these books, and for someone who loves magic and fantasy, this didn't bother me at all, because the magic here is just in the writing style itself, and in the way that the author describes languages, because again, Odom was a linguist, and I feel like this is like an homage to language. Just the way that she describes languages and their sounds and the effect of language on people, it is so masterful. As far as pacing, I wouldn't go in expecting a super fast-paced novel, but it's not slow-paced either. I would say it's like pretty clean in the middle. Also, with just how immersive it is, I had a hard time putting it down. The prose is sharp. It pulls you into a world with deep-rooted superstitions and meticulously drawn cultures. If you love military fantasy with high stakes and complex character dynamics, this is one you're not gonna want to miss. I would give this book a very solid like 4 or 4.5 out of 5. huge congratulations to By Blood, By Salt, by JL Odom. I'm very excited to see how this book performs in the finals. I'm also really excited to read all the other judges' finalists as well. And that's about it. If you want to keep up to date on my SPFBO thoughts, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. I have more reviews coming soon.